We launched our new free Alex Jones Radio Show app yesterday, and it's already number 8 on the iPhone's app in the news section. At current rates, it will eclipse by next week the number 2 and number 1 spot of the New York Times. The free app to listen how you want, when you want, where you want on your iPhone is at Infowars.com, a link to the subsection so you don't have to search for it at the iPhone store. Of course, for over a year, we've been listed as the top news radio talk show on Flycast that has hundreds of stations and shows, so you can listen on any cell phone with that system. But this is easy. Just get the app. You've got it. We're adding a news feature to it, news tickers. It's got an alarm clock, a bunch of other features. It's got a big back end we can add things to. It's already got a bunch of features, and that's free. About 5 weeks ago or so, we had Max Kaiser on the show, and he was talking about learned helplessness. And he was reading from an article, Are Americans a Broken People? Why We've Stopped Fighting Back Against the Forces of Oppression. And then I had a chance to see Dr. Bruce E. Levine on Max's TV show, so we got him on the broadcast today, because I've read so many corporate documents. One of the best examples was in 2001. They had a RFID summit in Chicago with Gillette, the Pentagon, and others saying, how do we force everybody to accept RFID in every can of beans, every razor, all your tires, tracking everywhere you go? We'll make the real world like a Google searchable system where everything's tracked. And they said, our internal studies show 87% don't want this, but it also shows we can create a sense of brokenness or desperation where they just submit once we break through these barriers. So they know what they're doing. And the naked body scanners recording you and your children's genitals, lying about it, saying they don't record it. Now it's admitted they do record it in the TSA's own documents. It's all about a journey into total enslavement. Now the chief of police in Austin takes blood without warrants. They do it all over the state of Texas. I mean, under a federal grant. In England, they come up and do random checkpoints and ask you if you're a terrorist. We're being bathed in tyranny. Bruce E. Levine, Ph.D., is a clinical psychologist and author of Is Surviving America Depression Epidemic? How to Find Moral Energy and Community in a World Gone Crazy. Dr. Levine has been a private practice since '85 and has presented talks and workshops to diverse organizations throughout North America. He's also the author of Commonsense Rebellion, Taking Back Your Life from Drugs. That's a good psychologist. Shrinks, Corporations, and the World Gone Crazy. And 2003, and he was recently authored the chapter Troubled Children and Teens, Common Sense Solutions Without Psychiatric Drugs and Manipulations for Alternative Beyond Psychiatry. Peter Lehman, publishing 2007. Dr. Levine has been a regular contributor to Z Magazine, Alternet, and his articles and interviews have been published in numerous other magazines. He is an editorial advisor for the Icarus Project, Freedom Center, Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off Psychiatric Drugs. On the editorial advisory board of the Journal for Ethical, Human, Psychological, and Psychiatry. Bruce Levine is his website, spelled BruceLevine.net. And we again appreciate him joining us. Maybe I should keep him the whole hour if he's got time. I did just have him to 40 after, because I want to talk some about the mass drugging of the population and then how these synthetic drugs in many studies are more dangerous than heroin and cocaine. And now they're saying pregnant women are all mentally ill. And if you have a car wreck, you're mentally ill. And everybody's got to be drugged. But that's a separate issue from this type of broken population who've capitulated. I kind of took issue with Max Kaiser on the TV show when he said, you know, Alex Jones tells you all these problems, but where are the solutions? All we talk about is taking our states back, shattering the left-right paradigm, empowering people, how you can stand up. All we are is solutions. But I also believe the biggest solution is really discrediting the system and really bringing people to grips with just how ruthless and sociopathic and in some cases sadistically psychopathic elites that have been competing with each other in a kind of survival of the fittest race towards the most corrupt, manipulative, and silver-tongued getting into control. And we see that throughout human civilization in the last 10,000 years. But Doctor, thanks for coming on with us.
Good to be on your show, Alex.
Okay, you've got the floor. Break down this article, Are We a Broken People, and then how this has happened and how we empower ourselves.
Okay, well, a lot of things that I think a lot of folks probably have a reflex, a healthy reflex, that anything a psychologist has to say is like, well, this is just going to be some elitist psychobabble. And I think that's a healthy reflex. So let me just preface what I'm saying is that there are a lot of the kind of elitism in my whole profession has to do, some of it's outright lies, but a lot of it has to do with trying to make stuff that's just basic common sense into using professional jargon to make it sound like it's some kind of special inside information. So let me just talk about a few things that are important when you're trying to understand how you break a population that are just basic common sense. One is this whole idea of learned helplessness, which I guess a bunch of my colleagues had to go through a whole bunch of studies, shocking dogs, to discover that if you put a dog in a situation where they've got no control over their shocks, they're going to get into a depressed, helpless state versus a dog who gets to, have some control over their shocks, and they're going to not be so depressed. It's just basic common sense stuff. If you've got no control over your situation, if all you get to do every year, for example, specifically, is to choose between a Democrat who pushes corporate control and senseless wars, a Republican who pushes corporate control and senseless wars, or you get to vote maybe for a third party and then the Democrat and Republican wins, or you don't vote, and in any case you always get corporate control and senseless wars, you move into a kind of state of learned helplessness. Okay, that's all that really means. Another, I think, important concept, again, common sense stuff for any of you out there who have ever been in an abuse syndrome or know anybody in it, is you realize that you get to a certain point where you've been kind of beat up and allowed yourself to stay in a relationship too long, whether this is with another human being or with an institution or with a government, that you go too far and you get broken. So in other words, you get to a situation where you know the truth. Okay, you know the truth that, for example, the guy or the woman that you're with is physically, emotionally, sexually abusive. You cannot leave. You're too weak. Or you're in that situation in your corporation, in your business, and you know that about your boss, but you've gotten yourself so weak that you cannot leave. Or that, in fact, happens, I think, for citizens in a society who actually more and more people don't even call themselves citizens in the U.S. anymore. They call themselves consumers, customers. I mean that, and so you get to a certain point, which I'm concerned of, that has already happened here in the United States, is that we do have a broken population, and that we get to a point where the truth is inspirational for some people. It is energizing for some people. It is, helps them, but not for everybody. This is not Thomas Paine's colonial America, where you had a guy like Thomas Paine taking the courage to write a book called, a pamphlet called Commonsense, and then, knowing the population knew that how much guts that took, because if they caught him, they would hang him, and, about hundreds of thousands of people read it, and it's inspired them. This is not this kind of society anymore. Most of those colonials were not broken people, okay? And we have a society today where, unfortunately, truth does not set people a lot free, and that's what happens when you have an abused, broken population.
Well, I agree with you, but I've read well over 100 books on the revolutionary period and the 15 years before that I think is even more important. And I know it was 1% that started it, 3% in the middle of the war, 5% by the end. Really, 80% kind of sat out, and the British had about 15% supporting them. And if you even look at bad revolutions, like the communists or the Nazis, they were only 5% at the start. So, my message is good revolutions, bad revolutions against corruption or tyranny, or fake revolutions into more tyranny, it's always a minority that changes the world. Look at abolitionists in 1800. Maybe 2% of the population. 66 years later, slavery is, basically over, but other forms of it continued. So my issue is, hey, half the people here this show may get even more helpless. I'm not looking for them, doctor. I'm looking for those that have the spirit of 1776.
Well, that makes sense. We're not in any disagreement, Alex. I mean, that's what I totally, if you're not completely broken, truths are going to energize you. So, for example, you mentioned the abolitionist, John Brown, his dream was he's going to go ahead and confront the U.S. government in the most direct way possible, and that's going to inspire a slave revolt. Well,
a military attack, yeah. Yeah,
it never happened, but it did inspire a lot of other people. It was highly energizing for some people who were on the fence there or close to feeling like this was a great idea. So I think that's an important thing if you're going to think about this thing psychologically, is that you have to kind of gauge your population and, for example, not waste time with a completely broken population, that in some ways not only aren't you going to energize them, but if you've ever hung out with anybody who's in an abuse syndrome on a personal level, that not only don't you energize them by telling them that their spouse is an abusive idiot, you can shame them. You can make them put them even in more pain. And, pain for me is the source of why people get depressed and apathetic. If people are overwhelmed by enough pain, they shut down. They just drink alcohol. They use, drugs. They'll get depressed. And so you have to gauge your population, who you're talking to.